Non-traditional storytelling is an advanced course, if you will. So if you're having trouble keeping your facts straight through chronological order, this is not the route you want to go in your storytelling life. You don't want to go back and forth bouncing around with flashbacks or out of order if you can't keep your story straight by keeping your story straight.
Welcome to Mastering Your Message. We believe that you have a message and that people need to hear it. So we want to help get that message crafted, get that message battle tested, and get that message out there. We can help you get it all together. This is the website, masteryourmessage.net. Give us the info we need, and we'll set you up with classes and coaching to help you get your message mastered. My name is Jay Clifton-Payne, and I want to thank you for joining us for the podcast today. Today, we're going into storytelling, but not the basics of storytelling today. We're going to go off track, really out of the beaten path for today's message, because we're going to talk about non-traditional storytelling. Now, as you have learned from being alive for all these years, a story is a simple construction, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Stories are how people have communicated for years, how we've passed along messages and passed along ideas from generations to generations, usually in the form of a story. Because of the scarcity of paper and the scarcity of people who could read in the first place, putting things down on images such as paper was not an efficient way to get a message across. It was more efficient to just tell people and hopefully get the message through, hopefully not losing too many pieces. The best way to not lose pieces to a message was to tell it in a narrative form, a story that even if the tales got larger and things got overblown, the main points of the story would always come to light. That's why so many tall tales and folk tales from the old days have so many variations, and so many cultures who've taken the same heroes and turned them into their own have so many different tales on how things work out. So you can think of modern storytelling as akin to movie making. The art of getting a movie down comes in lots and lots of pieces, from people setting lighting scenes to people going over lines over and over again to people doing various takes from various angles to come up with one full story at the end. That story is hopefully cohesive and hopefully compelling so that you want to relive the story, hopefully, and maybe even get more stories of those characters, sequels, if you will. Now, let's say you're trying to convey a message and you want to use storytelling, which is a very popular way to do it, but you want to do something in a non-traditional form. Not all movies or books or TV shows or any medium all follow the linear sense of storytelling. Think of The Princess Bride, which is a story within a story that does have several flashbacks inside the story to recall things that you may or may not have forgotten while the story is being told. Or the big classic Pulp Fiction, which is a story that bounces around here and there, telling various parts of a story, various pieces of a full story that intertwine in various pieces. You'll find that a story told at the beginning interacts with something towards the end after something happens. And of course, there is the scene where Chili Palmer gets killed in the middle of the movie, and then come back to the end of the movie in the scene that actually ties into the opening of the movie, a long, drawn-out affair with all the stories there. That's considered a classic masterpiece of nonlinear storytelling, putting things out of order and giving you something so compelling you're just stuck along with it. And the message you get at the end is, oddly enough, the big message, although time-wise, chronologically, it's given somewhere near the beginning, middle-ish of the movie. You can do the same thing in your storytelling. You can do the same thing in your presentations. But here's the caveat. You're doing this at your own risk. Non-traditional storytelling is an advanced course, if you will. So if you're having trouble keeping your facts straight through chronological order, this is not the route you want to go in your storytelling life. You want to keep things beginning, middle, and end. You don't want to go back and forth bouncing around with flashbacks or out of order if you can't keep your story straight by keeping your story straight. So let's go into some examples of how nonlinear works, taking the lines and moving them out of line, if you will. One quick example is to start in the middle and then go to the beginning and then the end. Instead of beginning, middle, end, start where it starts, go through the full progressions and tell you what happens when it's all over. You can start somewhere in the middle of the story. You give descriptions of where things are right now, where things are in the moment, where things are maybe right before you got there, because the end may be where you are right now. You talk about things right before the climax, right before the big reveal, right before the big shebang. And then you go back to the beginning to tell folks how they actually got to this middle section. And then you go to the end and tell them what the actual resolution is or what it's supposed to be. If your middle is the right now, if the end is then where you project to go on forward from here. So there it's a start, middle, or middle beginning to future end. But the same thing applies. You start in the middle of the story where the characters are in the middle of their conflict or about to reach the big part of conflict. And then you go back to how they got to be who they are. Then you wrap up with what the actual ending is, whether it is the conclusion that was done or the moving forward direction where you think they're going to go. So technically, it's a middle beginning on the way to the end. Same thing applies for order. Now, what gets even harder is when you start at the end. You start at the conclusion. You start where everything is done. The battle is over. The battle has been won or lost by the antagonist. And then you go back and figure out how you want to fill in the blanks. You either go back to the beginning, then the middle, and the end, just like normal. You can tell the whole story from the back, even though you've already lived it or you've seen the end of it, and then you tell people how you got there. Or you do something really interesting and you go back to the middle again and you give them everything building up to this end, and then you come up with the actual beginning of how the whole thing came about. And then there's the really technical issue, like we said in the example using both movies we use, the flashbacks and the jump cuts for both Princess Bride and Pulp Fiction, because they both use a lot of both of those sort of tricks and traits in the movie. But you do this in your speaking, you do this in your message making, using flashbacks and jump cuts, if you will. That's where you go to what you're going to talk about. You talk about things going on. Then you call out episodes in the past, maybe in the future, that aren't necessarily linear what you're talking about. You jump back to something that happened to get you to the place, just like the middle, beginning, end, except you're already telling the story. The story can start anywhere it wants to. Then you flash back or flash forward to another moment, another example. You give people a baseline of what they're looking at, and then you give them an alternate to look at, just in case something were to change at that moment for that example to compare those two. Then you come back to the regular story and go on and on and on, and maybe throw some more flashbacks and jump cuts in the story. How do these work out in real life? Well, it depends. If you're great at storytelling, people will be enthralled in how you tell the story and where it comes out to. If you're not so great at storytelling yet, because we're sure you're going to get better, then sticking to the beginning, middle, end is the proper way. As we said much, much, much earlier in these episodes of the podcast, you just tell them what you're going to tell them, say it to them, and then tell them exactly what you told them. That's the simplest way to convey a message, and just do it that way. The advanced tricks are not going to make the message seem any more meatier, but if you're good at it, it can make you seem a bit more advanced in the tracks. So don't feel like you have to go on and do advanced tracking storytelling. Just tell the story traditionally and get it over with. But if you're up for the challenge and your audience can follow along, this can be a great way to gather more engagement with what's going on out there. Now, since we're talking about storytelling in this episode, there's a good chance you're possibly using a partner in some of these messages you're doing. And you can do it very easily in storytelling modes where different people tell different parts of the story, either going back to back or maybe interjecting in for the jump cuts, as we said in the example there. But what happens when you have two people trying to deliver a message and it doesn't work? Can you actually get a message through with too many messengers delivering the same message? And sometimes it's not just in the actual presentation. Sometimes they're just delivering the same message in different forms and just slightly changing up the verbiage, and that could be enough to make the message get muddled. We're going to talk about that coming up in the next episode. But in the meantime, thank you for being a part of this episode. Now that I've delivered my message today, check out our website, masteringyourmessage.net. We're going to help you create, craft, and, of course, master your message. There are free materials as well as paid courses and personal coaching services to choose from, but we can't help you get started on your journey to message perfection until you visit us at masteringyourmessage.net. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating or review, and share it with some friends who are also looking to master their messages.